Broadcasting from the basement of La Penta, it's WICR.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Fall Jersey. Joe Archino back here. And I think it kind of goes without saying that we had a little bit of a major shakeup in college football this weekend. Michigan loses. Clemson loses, Washington loses, and then what has become almost a pattern, Alabama finds the way to win. And I think you really saw what we've come to know about this season in college football, and it really is Alabama is just staggeringly better than everyone else. And I don't know if you could have said that at every point this season, but I think now it has become abundantly true, and it's just one of those things where, look, we know that they're not winning behind flashy quarterback play. Certainly, you rank them out of the top four teams before the losses this past weekend. You're talking Jake Browning, you're talking Wilton Speight, you're talking about Deshaun Watson, and then, of course, Jalen Hurts. And obviously, Speight and then Jalen Hurts are probably the two weakest quarterbacks out of that list, but Hurts has really done a good job at progressing further and further throughout this season, and you have to give him a lot of credit for a young kid like that to just come into a Nick Saban system like that and just own it like he did. That's tremendously just a really, really testament to how good he really is. And look, we know how good of a defense he has behind him. The running game is always going to be a good staple. He's always going to have great, talented playmakers with him as well. But Jalen Hurts has really been able to handle his own throughout this season. And I think now that we're kind of moving forward even more a little bit, you just have to ask the question, who's going to beat Alabama? Is it really going to be that easy for them to defend their title from last season? And, whenever it looks too easy in professional sports or college sports, it usually is. But I think in Alabama's case, you just kind of have to look at how it would line up for them. And I think you look at their last two games of the regular season. They've got Auburn in the Iron Bowl, which you always know is going to be fun. It's always going to be an emotional rivalry game. But Auburn showed you just this past weekend, and Auburn had been playing much better to that point. Auburn had rallied, their offense had gotten a spark, it looked like things were clicking better for them, but then this past weekend, you just kind of see how much trouble that offense really has. And I think when you look at the way that their offense had trouble this past weekend, well, what do you expect them to be able to do against Alabama? And then in the SEC championship game, I mean, in the SEC, this season particularly, there has really been a drop-off between Alabama and everyone else, and we really know that they've had a run for their money in some games, in some quarters, but I don't know if you could look at a start-to-finish matchup where Alabama really struggled throughout the whole phase. They have really come out of every game with their dominance intact, and once again after this weekend, I think we see that dominance there, and they really have owned the competition this year. After Alabama, though, because we all know there's no question, I don't think they're going to change at all. I see them easily getting past these last two regular season games, and then, of course, in the SEC championship game, whoever they do end up playing, I just don't think you're going to get enough competition to really go toe-to-toe for the four quarters with Alabama. But behind them is where it gets interesting, and obviously the committee is not afraid to switch things up and to make us kind of question their decisions a little bit, but I do think that it will look what we are thinking about right now. And the coaches poll came out, and I think largely that's probably what we're going to see from the committee. And a lot of people have Ohio State number 2, and I think that's the right one, right behind Alabama. For weeks, you've been hearing me say that I think Ohio State has been the best team in the country. Then they went off and they had a little bit of a tough streak, a tough game against Indiana, a tough game where they had to go to overtime to beat Wisconsin, and then they lose to Penn State. So I think that loss to Penn State to me at the time really looked bad. But Penn State has built up their credibility over since that win took place. And at the beginning of the year, and then even after that, I really was not a buyer on Penn State at all. I'm still not all in on them, but I do think that they've really shown a lot of poise and a lot of promise these last few weeks since they have beaten Ohio State. So that, and the committee has already shown how good they think the Big Ten is this year. They've already shown, and I think for that reason, Ohio State's not going to have that much of a problem, and they should be ranked at the 2 spot. And I really do think the only team in college football who can beat Alabama is Ohio State, and it's Urban Meyer and his quarterback, JT Barrett. You can't really find me a whole lot of other guys who could match up toe-to-toe like that head coach in that quarterback combination can. And Clemson, I mean, look, that national championship game last season was tremendous, but I think you've seen the tremendous drop-off for Clemson last year. I mean, last year, you're talking about the number 2 total ranked offense in the country last season, putting up points like the best of them. This year, they have dropped into the 30s in the total ranked offense in the country. To go from a giant drop like that with the same quarterback and the same head coach, that's something that really puzzles me. And Watson has played well when he's had to in big moments, but he's also been very turnover prone. We saw in the Pittsburgh game they just lost to. I think you look at this. Ohio State's got no picnic walk to getting to this point. Michigan's going to be a very difficult game. We still don't even know what's going to happen in regards to the Big Ten championship game. So Ohio State, it's not saying, and it's not guaranteed that they'll even get there. But I do think toe-to-toe, there's not another team in the country who can stack up with Alabama outside of Ohio State. Now, I think we all agree on 1 and 2. 3 and 4 is certainly where it starts to get interesting. And I will preface that by saying, I think after the 5th-ranked team in this country, you really look and there's a drop-off. There's no one who's even in the same hemisphere as the top 5 to 8 teams. I'm talking Alabama, Ohio State, Louisville, Michigan, Clemson. Wisconsin had a great year. Washington, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh. I might actually bump them up. So maybe let's say there's 6 teams in the country, and after that, there's a tremendous, tremendous drop-off. Now, I know the committee hasn't been very high in the Pac-12 this season. They regard it as a down year for the conference. That's obviously after their first rankings, they put Texas A&M in front of Washington, which I think puzzled a lot of us. Then Texas A&M goes out and loses. Washington gets put in that 4 spot, and then they lose a game to USC. But I think a lot of us kind of agree Washington's got a very tough final stretch of their schedule. They've got a championship game under their belt that they'll most likely be playing in, so they could very well get back into this thing. But I think right now, who are we putting in that 3 spot? Now, the coaches poll had Louisville there, and if that is what the committee decides to do, I don't particularly have any problem with it, because I think you look at Louisville, and it hasn't been the prettiest season at times. They have struggled to get past Duke. They have struggled in a couple other matchups, but the one that we all turned out for was Louisville-Clemson. And in that game, that was a tremendous game, back and forth. Just both teams played extremely well, and I think because of that, Louisville will get that spot. And it's all timing also, and certainly Clemson losing to Pittsburgh the way they did, and Louisville still being where they are, and that loss is a few weeks back now, so it's not as fresh in our minds. Louisville most likely will be at that 3 spot, and I think right now I don't really see too much of a problem with it. Now, 4 is certainly where the debate is going to be up in the air. What does the committee do here? Do they go with Michigan at 4? Do they put Clemson at 4? I think it's obviously going to be one of the two, or Wisconsin seems to be a team that a lot of people are really buying right now. I mean, in the coaches poll, you see they have them ranked over Washington, and again, I think that people have really not been totally fair with Washington this year. Even though the Pac-12 has been down, I think that Washington has a very good team. Jake Browning's had a really good year, and we'll really see the real deal about Washington as we get closer to the end of the season, because they've got some tough matchups left. But if I have to decide between Michigan and Clemson in that 4 spot, I mean, I think a lot of things kind of have to go into an account there, and obviously the nature of the Big Ten, which has been very highly regarded by the committee this year, certainly is going to be something that plays into it. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw Michigan at 4. I still probably have a hard time taking Clemson outside of that top 4 right now. And I think obviously Pittsburgh to me is a loss a lot of people will consider not to be a great one. And it isn't a great one, but Pittsburgh isn't a terrible team. I mean, that was a game where the nature of it came down to the wire, a lot of points. I still don't think Clemson, no matter what happens, even if they get in the playoff, that they'll win it all. I just think to drop off the way that they have offensively, it's just not going to happen. But I think Clemson certainly right now, they have a chance to get back into that top 4. But It's really coming down to the crunch time. There's not a lot of time left, so the timing of these losses late, which is like we usually see, it just adds a whole nother element to it, and it makes things a lot more difficult. But to me, and I think we all agree, that the drop-off between Alabama and everyone else is just as substantial as it gets right now. The championship game for them won't be much of a problem, and the formula to beat this Alabama team, it's not really known to anyone right now. I mean, we saw last season, Jay Coker to me was, I mean, I did not buy into Alabama for a long time just because love the defense, love the talent on that roster, but I thought in a big game when it mattered most, Jay Coker wasn't going to be able to get it done for them. And then as you started watching more and more towards the end of the year, you saw Jay Coker really come into his own. Still wasn't always pretty, but he was able to make big plays when he had to. In the Michigan State game, you saw he was probably one of his best games all year. And then in the national championship game, well, we know what happened there, and he had a sensational performance. But Alabama showed that they could not only just be that consistent defensive juggernaut we know them to be, and they could win behind offense. And that's really what it's developed into, and that's why you give Lane Kiffin so much credit there with what he's been able to do. He has been able to add that offensive component to Alabama. And when Nick Saban won all his early championships, there was the same formula. It was give the ball to the running back, the quarterback doesn't turn the football over, and you rely on that stout defense that nobody can run on, and very rarely can anyone throw on. But now it's kind of a two-way street for Alabama, and it's just adding more and more of a dimension. But to me, Alabama and Ohio State are 1 and 2 undisputed, and after that, you can really put whoever you want there, because I don't think anyone comes close to those two. But that is going to do it for this segment, everyone. We will see what the committee decides to do and break it down further this week. Thank you for listening. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe Archino and on Instagram, Jersey_Joe_Archino. And I'll catch everybody in the next episode.